"This plane isn't for people like you," screamed the arrogant woman, pointing at the maintenance worker's tools. Drawing the attention of every first-class passenger, she jabbed her finger toward the young man. "Call the captain. You don't belong here," she added. But none of them knew that this man was about to become the only person who could save their lives. The real story was about an aircraft cleaner being questioned by security, and the most shocking ending was the prevention of a major security breach. Yes, that will be with you in our next video. Marcus Thompson had worked as an aircraft maintenance technician at Denver International Airport for 6 years. At 28, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who understood machines better than most people understood themselves. His calloused hands told the story of countless hours spent diagnosing problems, replacing components, and ensuring the safety of aircraft that carried millions of passengers each year. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Marcus completed his overnight shift at 5:30, performing routine inspections on 3 different aircraft. His supervisor, Jim Bradley, had complimented his thoroughness during the shift briefing. Marcus took pride in his work, understanding that every bolt he tightened, every system he tested, could mean the difference between life and death for the passengers who would board those planes. As his shift ended, Marcus gathered his tools and headed toward the employee exit. He was scheduled to fly to Chicago that afternoon for a 3-day maintenance training conference. His mother, who still lived in his hometown, had insisted he visit while he was in the area. She worried about him working such demanding hours and living alone in Denver, constantly reminding him to take care of himself. Marcus pulled out his boarding pass as he walked through the terminal. Gate 24B, Flight 392 to Chicago, departing at 2:15 p.m. He had several hours to kill, so he decided to grab breakfast at one of the terminal restaurants and maybe catch a few hours of sleep in the employee lounge. But fatigue and the maze-like layout of Denver's massive terminal led him astray. The gate numbers seemed to spiral in confusing patterns, and construction barriers had redirected foot traffic through temporary corridors. After walking for what felt like 20 minutes, Marcus found himself at what he thought was Gate 24B, but the electronic departure board showed Flight 447 to Seattle, not his flight to Chicago. Marcus stood there, confused, checking his boarding pass again. The gate number matched perfectly, but the destination was wrong. He approached the gate agent's desk, but she was dealing with an increasingly agitated passenger who was demanding an upgrade and threatening to file complaints with corporate headquarters. The agent looked frazzled and overwhelmed.
"Excuse me," Marcus said politely, holding up his boarding pass. "I think there might be some confusion. My ticket shows this gate, but the destination doesn't match." The gate agent glanced at his boarding pass without really looking at it. "Sir, just get in line, please. We're running behind schedule and need to board passengers immediately." She waved him toward the boarding queue without making eye contact, already turning her attention back to the angry passenger. Still uncertain, but not wanting to cause further delays, Marcus joined the line of passengers waiting to board. His boarding pass scanned with the familiar beep, and the gate agent's computer accepted it without any error messages. Before he could question it further, he was walking down the jet bridge toward the aircraft. The flight attendant at the aircraft door barely glanced at his boarding pass before directing him toward the back of the plane. "Welcome aboard, sir. Your seat is in the rear cabin." As Marcus made his way down the narrow aisle, his heavy tool bag slung over his shoulder caught the attention of several passengers. A businessman in an expensive suit sitting in row 8 looked at him with obvious suspicion. The man's briefcase bore the logo of a prominent consulting firm, and his watch probably cost more than Marcus earned in a month. "Excuse me," the businessman said loudly, his voice carrying throughout the cabin. "Are you supposed to be carrying those tools on board? Isn't that a security issue?" The question attracted stares from other passengers. Marcus felt his face flush with embarrassment as dozens of eyes turned toward him. He tried to explain quietly, hoping to avoid further attention. "I'm a passenger, sir. I work in aircraft maintenance, but I'm traveling for business today." "In first class?" The voice came from row 3, sharp and imperious. A woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and jewelry that screamed wealth had turned in her seat to face him. Her name was Victoria Ashford, though Marcus didn't know it yet. She was accustomed to having her demands met without question, and the sight of a working-class man carrying tools in the first-class cabin offended her sense of proper order. Victoria's husband owned a chain of luxury hotels, and she had grown up in privilege, never quite understanding that her comfort depended on the skilled work of people like Marcus. To her, the world was divided into those who belonged in first class and those who didn't, and this maintenance worker clearly fell into the wrong category. "Ma'am, I have a valid ticket," Marcus replied, showing his boarding pass with as much dignity as he could muster. Victoria stood up, her voice rising to ensure everyone in the cabin could hear her. "This plane isn't for people like you. Call the captain. You don't belong here." Her outburst caused a ripple of uncomfortable murmurs throughout the first-class cabin. The head flight attendant, Sandra Mills, approached with practiced diplomacy. She was a veteran with 15 years of experience in commercial aviation, someone who had seen every type of passenger conflict imaginable. Sandra had learned to de-escalate situations before they spiraled out of control, understanding that maintaining cabin harmony was essential for safety and customer satisfaction. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" Sandra asked professionally, her tone neutral but firm. Marcus handed it over, his face burning with embarrassment. Every passenger in the front section was watching the interaction, some with curiosity, others with obvious judgment. Sandra examined the boarding pass carefully, then checked her passenger manifest on a tablet device. Her expression shifted from routine professionalism to confusion, then concern. "Sir, this boarding pass is for Flight 392 to Chicago. You're currently on Flight 447 to Seattle." The cabin fell silent, except for the ambient noise of the aircraft's systems. Marcus felt his stomach drop as the reality of his mistake sank in. "I'm sorry, I must have gotten confused at the gate. I can get off and catch my correct flight." But as he turned to gather his belongings and leave, something stopped him cold. A sound that shouldn't be there, transmitted through the aircraft's structure and into the cabin. It was subtle, barely perceptible to most people, but to Marcus's trained ear, it was as clear as a fire alarm. A rhythmic grinding noise was coming from beneath the floor, somewhere in the vicinity of the landing gear bay. The frequency and pattern were unmistakable to someone who had spent years diagnosing mechanical problems. This wasn't the normal sound of hydraulic systems cycling or landing gear settling into position. This was the sound of metal under stress, of bearings beginning to fail. Victoria Ashford wasn't finished with her performance. She had found an audience for her indignation and wasn't about to let the moment pass. "See? I told you he didn't belong here. Security should have caught this before he ever got on the plane. What kind of airline allows maintenance workers to just wander into first class?" Marcus barely heard her words. His attention was completely focused on the mechanical sound beneath them, his mind automatically running through diagnostic procedures. The grinding was coming from the port-side landing gear bay, and the frequency suggested a main bearing in the retraction mechanism. He had encountered this exact problem during a routine inspection 6 months earlier. If the bearing failed completely during flight, the landing gear might not retract properly during takeoff, creating dangerous drag and potentially catastrophic control issues. Worse, if the gear jammed in a partially retracted position, landing would become extremely hazardous or impossible. The aircraft began to taxi away from the gate, heading toward the runway. He knew they had perhaps 15 minutes before takeoff. Once they were airborne, any mechanical failure would become exponentially more dangerous. He raised his hand to get Sandra's attention. "Ma'am, I need to speak with the captain immediately." Sandra looked at him with barely concealed irritation. The delay caused by his boarding error had already put them behind schedule, and now he was making additional demands. "Sir, we need to get you off this aircraft so we can depart on time. The captain is busy preparing for takeoff." "You don't understand," he said, his voice urgent but controlled. There's mechanical issue. I can hear bearing failure in the landing gear system." Victoria laughed mockingly, her voice dripping with disdain. "Now he's pretending to be an expert. This is exactly why these people shouldn't be allowed in first class. They don't understand boundaries." The businessman from row 8 chimed in, clearly annoyed by the continued disruption. "Just remove him, please. We're already delayed, and some of us have important meetings to attend."
Other passengers began voicing their agreement. A woman in row 5 complained about missing her connection. A man near the window mentioned an important business dinner in Seattle. The consensus in the cabin was clear. This maintenance worker was causing unnecessary delays and should be removed immediately. But Marcus pressed on, knowing that time was running out. "I'm a certified aircraft maintenance technician, license number AMT 447291. You can verify that with the FAA database. There's a grinding sound coming from the port landing gear bay that indicates imminent bearing failure. If this aircraft takes off, the landing gear may not retract properly, or worse, it could fail completely during flight." Sandra paused, studying Marcus's face carefully. There was something in his voice that cut through the chaos and complaints. It wasn't desperation or attention-seeking behavior. It was the calm confidence of a professional who knew exactly what he was talking about. She had worked with enough maintenance crews over the years to recognize genuine technical expertise when she heard it. "Are you absolutely certain about what you're hearing?" "Completely certain. I've been working on commercial aircraft for 6 years, specializing in landing gear systems. I know this sound. The bearing is failing, and it's only going to get worse with the stress of takeoff and landing gear retraction." The captain's voice came over the intercom, crisp and professional. "Flight attendants, prepare for departure. We'll be airborne in approximately 10 minutes." Sandra made a decision that would save 180 lives. "Captain, we have a potential maintenance concern reported by a passenger. I need you to come back here immediately." The groaning and complaints from the first-class cabin were immediate and vocal. Victoria Ashford was particularly incensed. "This is absolutely ridiculous. You're going to delay our entire flight because some maintenance worker got on the wrong plane and is now making up stories to cover his mistake?" But Captain Robert Hayes was already emerging from the cockpit. He was a seasoned pilot with over 20,000 flight hours, someone who had learned through experience to take safety concerns seriously, regardless of their source. In his 2 decades of flying, he had seen mechanical failures that could have been prevented if someone had spoken up sooner. "What's the issue?" Captain Hayes asked, his voice calm but alert. Marcus stood up, meeting the captain's eyes directly. "Captain, I'm hearing bearing failure in what sounds like the port landing gear retraction mechanism. It's a rhythmic grinding that increases in frequency when the aircraft moves. I'm a certified AMT, and I believe this aircraft should not take off until the landing gear system is thoroughly inspected." The captain studied Marcus carefully, taking in his work clothes, his confident posture, and the technical precision of his language. "What exactly are you hearing, and how certain are you about the diagnosis?" "A grinding sound with approximately 3-second intervals, consistent with main bearing rotation under load. The frequency increased when we started taxiing, which indicates the problem is worsening under operational stress. Based on the location and characteristics of the sound, I believe it's the primary bearing in the port landing gear retraction actuator."
The captain listened carefully, focusing his attention on the aircraft systems. At first, he heard nothing unusual beyond the normal sounds of engines, hydraulics, and avionics. But as he concentrated, training his ear to listen for mechanical anomalies, he began to detect a subtle vibration transmitted through the aircraft structure. It was barely perceptible, more felt than heard, but it was definitely there. The rhythm matched what Marcus had described, and the frequency seemed to be increasing as the aircraft continued taxiing toward the runway. "I need to verify this immediately," Captain Hayes said, his expression growing serious. He turned to Sandra. "Contact ground control and request permission to return to the gate. Tell them we have a potential mechanical issue that requires immediate inspection."
The announcement sent Victoria Ashford into an absolute fury. "This is outrageous! You're going to trust some man who can't even get on the correct flight? I demand to speak with airline management immediately. This is the worst service I've ever experienced." Other passengers began voicing their complaints more loudly. Business meetings would be missed. Connections would be lost. The delay was completely unacceptable, especially based on the word of someone who had obviously made a mistake by boarding the wrong flight. But Captain Hayes was already on his radio, communicating with air traffic control and ground operations. "Ground control, this is Flight 447 requesting immediate return to gate. We have a reported mechanical issue requiring emergency maintenance inspection." Within minutes, the aircraft was heading back toward the gate, and an emergency maintenance crew was being dispatched from the airline's main hangar. As they taxied back across the tarmac, Marcus could hear the grinding sound getting progressively worse. The vibration was now noticeable to other passengers, and Sandra was beginning to look genuinely concerned. "How did you know to listen for that specific sound?" she asked him quietly. "Experience and training. You learn to recognize the acoustic signatures of different types of mechanical failure. Bearing problems have a very distinctive sound pattern, especially when they're under rotational stress." Victoria Ashford, overhearing their conversation, snorted with derision. "So now he's an expert acoustics engineer. This is the most unprofessional situation I've ever encountered. I'm filing complaints with the airline, the FAA, and every travel review website I can find." When they reached the gate, the maintenance crew boarded immediately, carrying diagnostic equipment and wearing the focused expressions of professionals responding to a potential emergency. The chief mechanic was a gruff man named Jim Bradley, who had been working on aircraft for over 30 years. Captain Hayes explained the situation as Jim and his team listened intently. "One of our passengers reported hearing bearing failure in the port landing gear system. He's a certified maintenance technician who identified specific acoustic patterns indicating imminent mechanical failure." Jim looked around the cabin until his eyes landed on Marcus. "You the one who reported this?" "Yes, sir. Marcus Thompson, AMT license 447291. I'm hearing rhythmic grinding from what appears to be the main retraction bearing assembly." Jim's expression changed as he recognized the professional terminology and confident delivery. "Show me your license." Marcus pulled out his wallet and handed over his maintenance license and certification cards. Jim examined them carefully, checking the license number against his mental database of local maintenance personnel. "Legitimate credentials," Jim nodded approvingly. 28 years I've been doing this job, and I learned early to listen when a fellow mechanic speaks up. Can you describe the sound pattern in more detail?"
Marcus described the acoustic pattern in detail, explaining the frequency variations and how they correlated with the aircraft's movement and weight distribution. Jim listened intently, occasionally asking technical questions that demonstrated his respect for Marcus's expertise. "Let's take a look," Jim said, leading his team toward the landing gear access panels. The inspection would require several diagnostic procedures and could take anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours, depending on what they found. As the maintenance team worked, the cabin atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Victoria Ashford had become the unofficial spokesperson for passenger discontent, voicing complaints that resonated with others who were facing missed connections and disrupted travel plans. "This is completely unacceptable," she declared to anyone who would listen. "We're being held hostage by someone who doesn't even belong on this flight. I've been flying first class for 20 years, and I've never experienced such unprofessional treatment." The businessman from row 8 had joined her chorus of complaints. "I have a presentation to deliver in Seattle at 4 o'clock. This delay is going to cost my company a significant contract opportunity." But Sandra Mills was watching Marcus carefully, noting his calm professionalism and the respect the maintenance crew was showing him. Her 15 years of aviation experience had taught her to recognize genuine expertise, and everything about Marcus's demeanor suggested he knew exactly what he was talking about. 45 minutes into the inspection, Jim Bradley returned to the cabin with an expression that made Captain Hayes immediately concerned. The chief mechanic's face was grim, and he carried a small metal component that was clearly damaged. "Captain," Jim said quietly, but his words carried throughout the first-class cabin. Complete bearing failure was imminent. The main retraction bearing had separated, and metal shavings were contaminating the hydraulic system. If you had taken off, the landing gear would have jammed in the retracted position during the attempt to raise it. The color drained from Captain Hayes's face as the full implications sank in. Emergency landing procedures? Would have been necessary. Belly landing, probably. With a full fuel load and 180 passengers, it could have been catastrophic. The gear was maybe 10 minutes away from complete seizure. A stunned silence fell over the cabin as passengers absorbed what they had just heard. The maintenance worker they had been complaining about and demanding to have removed had potentially saved all their lives. Victoria Ashford sat in her seat, her face pale, as the reality of the situation became clear. The man she had berated and treated with such contempt had identified a mechanical failure that could have killed everyone on board.
Jim approached Marcus with newfound respect. "Son, that was exceptional diagnostic work. You caught something that our routine pre-flight inspection missed. How did you identify the specific bearing failure from the acoustic signature alone?" Marcus explained his methodology, describing how different types of mechanical failures produced distinctive sound patterns and vibration characteristics. He talked about the importance of understanding how stress loads affected different components and how operational conditions could accelerate wear patterns. The grinding frequency was too regular to be normal operational noise, Marcus explained, and the way it intensified during taxiing indicated that rotational stress was exacerbating the problem. The location of the sound, combined with the frequency pattern, pointed specifically to the main retraction bearing assembly. Captain Hayes joined the conversation, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "Mr. Thompson, you just saved this aircraft and everyone on board. I'm writing a formal commendation for your file, but more importantly, I want to recommend you for our airline's Safety Excellence Program." The news rippled through the cabin as Sandra explained to passengers that the flight had been canceled due to a critical mechanical issue that was discovered before takeoff thanks to the expertise of the maintenance worker they had criticized. The businessman from row 8 was the first to approach Marcus. His earlier arrogance had been replaced by humility and genuine gratitude. "I owe you a sincere apology, and quite possibly my life. What I said earlier was completely inappropriate." Other passengers began expressing their gratitude as well. An elderly woman from row 6 thanked him tearfully. A young father traveling with his children shook Marcus's hand and asked for his contact information so he could write a letter to the airline praising his actions. But Marcus wasn't looking for praise or recognition. His mind was already analyzing the systemic issues that could have led to this bearing failure going undetected during routine maintenance inspections. This wasn't just an isolated mechanical problem. It represented a potential gap in inspection procedures that could affect other aircraft in the fleet. Victoria Ashford remained in her seat, clearly struggling with the realization of how wrong she had been. After several minutes, she slowly approached Marcus, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to apologize," she said, her earlier arrogance completely gone. "What I said to you was inexcusable and shameful. You saved my life, and I treated you terribly. I'm truly sorry." Marcus looked at her for a moment, seeing genuine remorse in her expression. "We all make mistakes, ma'am. What matters is what we learn from them and how we treat others going forward." The grace and dignity of his response only deepened Victoria's shame about her earlier behavior. She had revealed her own prejudices and class-based assumptions in the most public way possible, and the man she had tried to humiliate had responded with kindness and wisdom. Jim Bradley was having an intense conversation with Captain Hayes about the broader implications of the bearing failure. "Captain, this type of failure doesn't happen overnight. The wear patterns suggest this bearing had been deteriorating for weeks, possibly months. Our inspection protocols should have caught this."
"What are you saying?" Captain Hayes asked. "I'm saying we need to inspect every aircraft in the fleet that uses this landing gear configuration. If one bearing failed, others might be approaching failure as well." The investigation that followed would eventually reveal that the bearing manufacturer had issued a service bulletin 6 months earlier, recommending enhanced inspection procedures for this specific component. The bulletin had been received by the airline's maintenance department, but had not been properly implemented across the fleet. Cost-cutting measures had led to extended maintenance intervals and streamlined inspection procedures. While these changes met minimum regulatory requirements, they had eliminated some of the redundant safety checks that might have identified the bearing deterioration before it became critical. As passengers disembarked to await a replacement aircraft, word of Marcus's actions began to spread throughout the terminal. Airport personnel who knew him from his work in the maintenance hangar approached to congratulate him. Other airline employees, pilots, and flight attendants stopped to thank him for upholding the highest standards of aviation safety. The replacement aircraft arrived 3 hours later, and passengers began boarding for the rescheduled flight to Seattle. The atmosphere was completely different from the earlier boarding process. Marcus found himself receiving nods of respect and quiet expressions of gratitude from fellow passengers.
Victoria Ashford had spoken with the gate agent about upgrading Marcus to first class as a gesture of appreciation, but Marcus politely declined. He had found his correct flight to Chicago and preferred to maintain a low profile. However, the airline's management had other ideas. Within hours of the incident, Marcus received a call from the Director of Maintenance Operations asking him to meet with senior executives the following day. The bearing failure had triggered a comprehensive fleet inspection, and they wanted his input on improving their maintenance protocols. As Flight 392 to Chicago finally departed later that evening, Marcus sat in his assigned economy seat, reflecting on the day's events. He had missed his original connection and would arrive in Chicago 8 hours behind schedule. But 180 people were alive because he had trusted his expertise and had the courage to speak up despite being criticized and dismissed. The maintenance conference he was attending in Chicago had an unexpected new agenda item. Word of his actions had reached the conference organizers, and they wanted him to present a case study on acoustic diagnostic techniques and the importance of comprehensive inspection protocols. Marcus's mother was waiting for him at Chicago O'Hare when he finally arrived, having heard about the incident through news reports that were already circulating in aviation industry publications. She hugged him tightly, pride and worry mixing in her expression. "I always knew you were special," she said softly, "but I never imagined you'd save all those lives." "I just did my job, Mom. I listened to what the aircraft was telling me." But the story was far from over. Within 24 hours, the airline's fleet-wide inspection had identified similar bearing deterioration in 12 other aircraft. Marcus's intervention had not only saved one flight, but had prevented multiple potential disasters across the airline's entire operation. The Federal Aviation Administration launched an investigation into the airline's maintenance practices and the manufacturer's service bulletin implementation procedures. Marcus found himself at the center of a case study that would eventually lead to industry-wide changes in inspection protocols and bearing maintenance requirements. 3 days later, Marcus was sitting in the airline's corporate headquarters in Denver, facing a panel of executives who wanted to offer him a position as Senior Safety Inspector. The role would come with significant authority to implement new inspection procedures and the responsibility for ensuring that safety standards were never compromised for cost considerations. "Mr. Thompson," said Jennifer Walsh, the airline's Director of Operations, "what you did saved lives and exposed critical gaps in our maintenance procedures. We want you to lead the effort to ensure this never happens again." The salary offer was substantial, nearly double what he was currently earning, with management responsibilities and the authority to ground aircraft if safety concerns were identified. But Marcus had conditions of his own. I'll accept the position, but I want complete transparency about the cost-cutting measures that led to this problem. I want to know every maintenance procedure that was modified or streamlined in the past 2 years, and I want the authority to reverse any changes that compromise safety. The executives agreed to his terms, recognizing that Marcus's expertise and commitment to safety were exactly what their organization needed. Within a week, he was leading a team of inspectors in implementing new protocols that would become the industry standard for landing gear maintenance.
The bearing manufacturer also faced consequences, with the FAA requiring them to issue stronger service bulletins and provide more comprehensive training for maintenance personnel. Marcus worked directly with their engineering team to develop improved inspection procedures and diagnostic training programs. 6 months later, Marcus stood before an audience of aviation professionals at the International Aviation Safety Conference, presenting the case study that had emerged from his experience on Flight 447. His presentation focused on the importance of listening to aircraft systems, trusting professional expertise, and maintaining safety standards regardless of cost pressures. "Aircraft speak to us constantly," he told the audience. "They tell us about their condition, their stress levels, and their maintenance needs. But we have to listen, and we have to act on what we hear, even when it's inconvenient or expensive." Victoria Ashford was in the audience that day, having become an advocate for aviation safety and worker respect following her transformative experience. She had used her social connections and resources to support Marcus's initiatives and had become a vocal supporter of treating all airline employees with dignity and respect. In her own presentation later that day, Victoria talked about the prejudices and assumptions that had led her to dismiss Marcus's expertise. She had become a powerful voice for recognizing that competence and professionalism exist at every level of the aviation industry, regardless of someone's job title or social status. The changes implemented as a result of Marcus's actions had far-reaching effects throughout the aviation industry. Maintenance protocols were strengthened, inspection intervals were enhanced, and a new emphasis was placed on empowering maintenance personnel to raise safety concerns without fear of retaliation or dismissal. Marcus's story became a case study taught in aviation maintenance schools and safety programs worldwide. His courage to speak up despite being dismissed and criticized had saved lives and improved safety standards for millions of future passengers.
2 years after the incident on Flight 447, Marcus Thompson had become one of the most respected safety inspectors in commercial aviation. His diagnostic techniques and maintenance protocols had been adopted by airlines across North America and Europe, significantly reducing the incidence of landing gear failures and other mechanical issues. The conference room in the Federal Aviation Administration headquarters in Washington, D.C., was filled with aviation safety experts, airline executives, and government officials. Marcus sat at the head of the table, presenting the final report on a comprehensive study of maintenance-related safety improvements that had emerged from his initial discovery of the bearing failure. The implementation of enhanced acoustic diagnostic training has resulted in a 37% increase in the early detection of mechanical failures across participating airlines, Marcus reported to the assembled group. More importantly, we've seen a significant reduction in emergency landings and maintenance-related safety incidents. The data was impressive and undeniable. The protocols Marcus had developed, based on his experience listening to aircraft systems and recognizing acoustic signatures of mechanical problems, had prevented dozens of potential disasters and saved the aviation industry millions of dollars in emergency repair costs and liability claims. Dr. Sarah Chen, the FAA's Director of Safety Standards, leaned forward with interest. "Mr. Thompson, can you explain how this acoustic diagnostic approach differs from traditional inspection methods?" Marcus clicked to the next slide in his presentation,
showing comparative analysis charts. Traditional inspections rely primarily on visual examination and scheduled component replacement. The acoustic approach adds a layer of real-time system monitoring that can detect problems before they become visible or reach critical failure points. He explained how maintenance technicians were now being trained to recognize specific sound patterns that indicate different types of mechanical stress and component wear. The training program included recordings of actual failure events and hands-on exercises with deliberately damaged components. The key insight, Marcus continued, is that mechanical systems communicate their condition constantly through vibration, sound, and other observable characteristics. We just need to train people to listen and understand what they're hearing. The success of the program had led to its expansion beyond just landing gear systems. Maintenance crews were now applying acoustic diagnostic techniques to engines, hydraulic systems, electrical components, and structural elements. The comprehensive approach had created a new standard for preventive maintenance in commercial aviation. But Marcus knew that technical improvements were only part of the story. The cultural changes that had emerged from his experience were equally important. Airlines had been forced to confront the reality that safety expertise existed at every level of their organizations, not just in management positions. Jennifer Walsh, who had since been promoted to Senior Vice President of Operations, addressed this aspect of the transformation. The incident on Flight 447 taught us that we need to listen to our frontline employees, regardless of their job titles or where they appear on the organizational chart. Some of our most valuable safety insights come from the people who work directly with aircraft systems every day.
The airline had implemented new procedures that encouraged maintenance personnel, ground crews, flight attendants, and even baggage handlers to report safety concerns without fear of retaliation. A confidential reporting system allowed employees to raise issues that might be overlooked or dismissed in the normal chain of command. Victoria Ashford had become an unexpected champion of these cultural changes. Her foundation, established after her transformative experience on Flight 447, provided funding for safety training programs and supported research into human factors in aviation safety. She had used her resources and social connections to advocate for treating all aviation workers with respect and dignity. "My behavior on that flight was shameful," Victoria told the conference attendees during her presentation. "I let prejudice and class bias blind me to the expertise of someone who was trying to save our lives. We can't let social hierarchies interfere with safety communications." Her foundation had funded scholarship programs for aviation maintenance training, specifically targeting students from underrepresented communities. The goal was to diversify the aviation workforce and ensure that people from all backgrounds had opportunities to contribute their skills and perspectives to aviation safety. The Federal Aviation Administration had taken notice of these initiatives and had incorporated similar principles into their regulatory framework. New rules required airlines to demonstrate that they had effective systems for receiving and acting on safety concerns from all employees, regardless of their position in the organizational hierarchy. Marcus's influence extended beyond just technical training and organizational culture. He had become a sought-after speaker at aviation conferences worldwide, sharing his story and advocating for a more inclusive and respectful approach to aviation safety. At the International Society of Air Safety Investigators Conference in London, Marcus presented a case study that had become legendary in aviation safety circles. The presentation room was packed with pilots, engineers, safety inspectors, and airline executives from around the world. "The technical aspects of what happened on Flight 447 are important," Marcus told the audience, "but the human elements are equally crucial. If the flight crew and passengers had successfully silenced me or had me removed from the aircraft, 180 people would have died." He clicked to a slide showing statistics on near-miss incidents that had been prevented by employees speaking up about safety concerns.
These numbers represent the power of creating environments where expertise is recognized and valued, regardless of its source. The audience included several people who had been on Flight 447 that day. Sandra Mills, the flight attendant who had made the crucial decision to listen to Marcus's concerns, was now a training supervisor for cabin crew safety protocols. She had developed programs that taught flight attendants how to recognize and respond to passenger-reported safety issues. Captain Robert Hayes had retired from flying but continued working as a safety consultant, helping airlines develop better communication protocols between crew members and ground personnel. His experience on Flight 447 had convinced him that effective safety systems required breaking down traditional hierarchies and encouraging input from all sources. Even Jim Bradley, the maintenance chief who had conducted the emergency inspection, had become an advocate for enhanced training and cross-department communication. He frequently spoke at maintenance conferences about the importance of respecting expertise wherever it was found. The ripple effects of that single incident continued to spread throughout the aviation industry. Aircraft manufacturers had updated their service bulletin procedures to ensure that critical safety information reached maintenance crews more effectively. Training schools had incorporated Marcus's diagnostic techniques into their curricula, and insurance companies had begun offering premium discounts to airlines that implemented comprehensive acoustic monitoring programs.
But perhaps the most significant change was in the way aviation professionals thought about safety communication. The old model of rigid hierarchies and compartmentalized expertise had given way to a more collaborative approach that valued input from all sources. Marcus had been invited to join several airline safety boards and regulatory committees, bringing his frontline perspective to policy discussions that had traditionally been dominated by executives and managers. His voice carried particular weight because of his demonstrated ability to identify critical safety issues that others had missed. At the Airlines for America Annual Safety Summit, Marcus delivered what many considered his most important presentation. Standing before an audience of airline CEOs and senior executives, he challenged them to think differently about safety and expertise. Safety isn't just about following procedures and meeting regulatory requirements, he said. It's about creating cultures where people feel empowered to speak up when they see problems, where expertise is recognized and valued regardless of job titles, and where the priority is always protecting human life. The presentation included testimonials from dozens of aviation workers who had reported safety concerns after being inspired by Marcus's example. Mechanics, baggage handlers, gate agents, and flight attendants had all contributed to preventing potential disasters by speaking up when they noticed problems. One particularly compelling testimony came from Maria Santos, a ground crew supervisor at Miami International Airport. She had noticed unusual wear patterns on aircraft tires during routine inspections, but her initial reports had been dismissed by management as routine maintenance issues. After hearing about Marcus's story, Maria told the conference, "I insisted on escalating my concerns to the engineering department." It turned out that the wear patterns indicated a problem with the runway surface that was affecting multiple aircraft. If we hadn't addressed it, we could have had a tire blowout during landing. The economic impact of Marcus's safety initiatives was equally impressive. Airlines implementing his acoustic diagnostic protocols had reduced maintenance costs by an average of 23%, while simultaneously improving safety margins. Early detection of mechanical problems allowed for scheduled repairs rather than emergency interventions, saving millions of dollars in operational disruptions. Boeing and Airbus had incorporated Marcus's diagnostic principles into their aircraft design specifications, creating built-in monitoring systems that could detect the acoustic signatures of component stress and failure.
These systems provided real-time feedback to maintenance crews and could automatically alert ground control if critical problems were detected during flight operations. The insurance industry had taken notice as well. Lloyd's of London, the world's leading aviation insurance market, had begun offering significant premium reductions to airlines that implemented comprehensive acoustic monitoring and employee safety reporting programs. The actuarial data clearly demonstrated that these initiatives reduced both the frequency and severity of aviation incidents. Marcus had been invited to testify before congressional committees investigating aviation safety regulations. His recommendations had influenced legislation requiring airlines to implement formal programs for receiving and investigating safety concerns from all employees, regardless of their position in the organizational hierarchy. The expertise to prevent disasters exists throughout every airline, Marcus told the House Transportation Committee. The challenge is creating systems that recognize and act on that expertise before problems become catastrophic.
The legislation that emerged from these hearings established new requirements for aviation safety reporting and mandated training programs that emphasized the value of frontline employee input. Airlines that failed to demonstrate effective safety communication systems faced significant penalties and increased regulatory oversight. International aviation organizations had also embraced Marcus's principles. The International Civil Aviation Organization had adopted his acoustic diagnostic standards as recommended practices for member countries. Training programs based on his methodologies were being implemented in aviation systems across Europe, Asia, and Latin America. At the European Aviation Safety Agency headquarters in Cologne, Germany, Marcus worked with international safety experts to develop global standards for maintenance training and safety communication. The program emphasized cultural sensitivity and local adaptation while maintaining core principles of technical excellence and inclusive safety practices. Aviation safety is a global responsibility, Marcus explained to the International Working Group. Aircraft manufactured in one country, maintained in another, and operated worldwide must meet the same high standards regardless of local economic or social conditions. The training programs they developed were specifically designed to work across different cultural contexts and organizational structures. Special attention was paid to ensuring that safety communication remained effective even in hierarchical societies where questioning authority might be culturally discouraged. Marcus's influence extended into aviation education as well. Universities with aerospace engineering and aviation management programs had invited him to develop curriculum components focused on human factors in safety systems. Students studying to become pilots, engineers, and aviation managers now learned about the importance of cross-functional communication and respect for diverse expertise. At Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, Marcus taught a course called Safety Communication and Cultural Awareness in Aviation. The course combined technical training and diagnostic techniques with lessons about recognizing and overcoming social biases that could interfere with safety communications. Future aviation leaders need to understand that safety expertise comes from many sources, Marcus told his students. Your job as managers and decision-makers will be to create environments where that expertise can be shared and acted upon effectively. The course included role-playing exercises where students experienced safety scenarios from different perspectives. Maintenance workers played the roles of flight attendants and ground crew members. The exercises helped students understand how social dynamics and power structures could either facilitate or hinder effective safety communication. Marcus's mother, who had worried about his demanding work schedule and dangerous profession, had become one of his proudest supporters. She attended many of his speaking engagements and had established a scholarship fund for students pursuing aviation maintenance careers. "I always knew my son was special," she told audiences at award ceremonies. But I never imagined that his ability to listen carefully would save so many lives and change an entire industry. The scholarship fund had grown to support dozens of students each year, with a particular focus on providing opportunities for young people from working-class families to enter aviation careers. The program included mentorship components that connected scholarship recipients with experienced professionals like Marcus. Victoria Ashford had become one of the largest supporters, contributing not just financially, but also by sharing her story about the importance of treating all workers with respect and dignity. Her transformation from a prejudiced passenger to a passionate advocate for workers' rights had become almost as well known as Marcus's technical heroism.
I learned something fundamental about human nature that day, Victoria often said in her speaking engagements. Competence and character aren't determined by job titles or social status. The man I tried to have removed from that aircraft possessed exactly the expertise we needed to survive, and I almost prevented him from sharing it because of my own ignorance and prejudice. The foundation Victoria established had expanded beyond aviation safety to address workplace dignity and respect across multiple industries. The organization provided training programs for managers and executives on recognizing and valuing expertise throughout their organizations. Marcus had been honored with numerous awards for his contributions to aviation safety, including the prestigious Wright Brothers Memorial Trophy and the FAA's highest civilian honor for safety excellence. But he remained most proud of the cultural changes that had emerged from his experience. At the 10th anniversary symposium of the Flight 447 incident, held at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, Marcus reflected on the broader implications of that day's events. The audience included many of the original passengers from the flight, airline executives, safety experts, and government officials. The technical aspects of preventing that bearing failure were important, Marcus said. But the real breakthrough was proving that safety expertise exists throughout our industry and that we have an obligation to listen to it regardless of its source. The symposium featured presentations from passengers who'd been on Flight 447, including several who had initially criticized Marcus for causing delays. Their testimonials about personal transformation and changed perspectives provided powerful evidence of the broader social impact of the incident. Dr. James Mitchell, a business consultant who'd been traveling to Seattle for an important presentation, spoke about how the experience had changed his approach to leadership and decision-making. I learned that expertise and wisdom can come from unexpected sources, and that my job as a leader is to create environments where people feel safe sharing their knowledge and concerns. The symposium also included updates on the ongoing implementation of safety protocols inspired by Marcus's work. Representatives from airlines around the world reported on their experiences with acoustic diagnostic training and employee safety reporting systems. Captain Elena Rodriguez from Iberia Airlines described how implementing Marcus's protocols had helped her maintenance team identify and prevent 3 potential mechanical failures in the past year. The training gave our technicians confidence to trust their observations and speak up when they detected problems, she explained. The economic benefits continued to accumulate as well. A comprehensive study by the Aviation Safety Institute calculated that the safety improvements inspired by Marcus's work had prevented an estimated 47 potential accidents and saved the industry over $2 billion in emergency response costs, liability claims, and operational disruptions. Perhaps most importantly, the cultural changes had created lasting improvements in workplace respect and communication throughout the aviation industry. Employee satisfaction surveys showed significant improvements in job satisfaction and safety confidence among frontline aviation workers.
Marcus concluded his anniversary presentation with a challenge to the audience that summarized the core lessons of his experience. Aviation safety depends on all of us working together with mutual respect and open communication. When we create environments where expertise is valued regardless of its source, where people feel empowered to speak up about safety concerns, and where we listen carefully to what our aircraft and our colleagues are telling us, we create the foundation for continued improvements in safety and performance. The standing ovation that followed lasted for several minutes, a testament not just to Marcus's individual heroism, but to the broader transformation he had helped inspire throughout the aviation industry. The man who had boarded the wrong flight had found his true destination, a future where aviation safety was strengthened by the expertise and dedication of every person working to keep aircraft and passengers safe.